Hi, and welcome to this AI and C# video on the Microsoft Agent Framework. Today we're going to revisit the AGUI, the Agentic User Interface protocol. There's already been a video, and if you haven't seen that, please do so. These are more advanced scenarios, and when I started this today and thought, okay, I want to make this video, I didn't know how big of a rabbit hole this was. This is by far the most advanced video in this series so far. And we're going to make custom agents and all kinds of things in order for this to work. Because this protocol, AGUI, is much more different than it lets on. It looks like it's just make a backend with some agents, make a front end, and new up some agents in a slightly different way, and then they look like this, like it is. But that is actually far from the truth. And I'm beginning to get to the point where it might not be worth it. Certainly not for some of the more really advanced stuff, but for those who really want it, because there is some really cool things in this. The thing that streaming is easy is the biggest thing by far, because streaming is so hard to do in a front end when the back end is a different process. If you run Blazor server, it's easy because it's in the same process and so on. But as soon as it's something React or Blazor WebAssembly, as what I have here, then it becomes very hard to do, especially if you want to do more advanced stuff than just send some data back. Because AGUI, if you just want to talk back and forward like a normal chatbot, it's very easy to do. And you don't need any kind of credentials if it's a free open system, because the connection is just a simple URL. And if you want more, you can use normal .NET authentication against that URL. So also very easy. You don't need any API keys or anything out in the front end. And then this amazing thing about being able to call client tools, where you can switch backgrounds, turn different things, and so on. But what I didn't know in the first video, and I actually made a wrong video, or not wrong, but I was talking about something being easy and something being hard, meaning that the simple request response was easy and the streaming was hard in a normal scenario. It's actually the complete opposite in this protocol, because everything is streaming. So if you try and make run async, it actually doesn't happen. It goes to run streaming async behind the scenes on the server, which I didn't know back when I made the first video. That also means that structured output, and I'm a big fan of structured output, which is why this is real. It's not really supported in the regular way. You can begin to do stuff, and I will show that. But you need to do more work in order to get it to work. So the run async with an object will simply not work. It will just completely ignore what object you asked for and just give the streaming context back like normal. And thirdly, only a subset of the different content types can be run between these servers, and user interactions is not possible either. So in order to get all these nice benefits over here, we need to jump to hoops on the server side and a bit on the client side in order to get it to work. I think it's still worth it on the simple stuff. But for example, I had planned to make a human in the loop example over here. And the sample code that CopilotKit makes is like 600 lines of code just to get human in the loop to work. It might become better in the future with Agent Framework, but if you want it here and now, this is what you need to do. So let's go into some code. So, to be this one. So I have moved ADUI up here and have a basic, which was the previous video, and now we have the advanced. And I will first show it to you, and then we will go through the code. So the new version is Blazor, because a few people on the old video requested that. It is also using Aspire, so we can start up both at the same time. So there's a backend and a front end, and we will get the front end here in 1 second. And I have on purpose kept it to the very minimum of UI, because there's enough to understand in the calling between the systems that if putting on additional UI on this would just have made it even more difficult to understand. So the first capability, which we also saw in the previous video, but now we see it through between Blazor and Web API, is that you can make client tools. So for example, I could say that the background, this should be red, and it will turn the thing red. I could say green, turn it green. And you might say, okay, that's stupid. Why spend time AI-wise on this? But I could, for example, go in and say the color, main color of the Canadian. And it will know that that is red, so it will turn it into red. So it's more than just a simple red, green, blue, and stuff. It is AI calling tools on the fly, and I have some plans for my end-to-end example to do some more than just things like this. So that's the client tools. They are quite simple to work with, actually. Then we have normal server tools and just some text result back. So for example, let's get the weather for Paris, and we will get something back here. And that is also simple. But then comes the hard part. Let's say instead of just some text here, we want to have the server tool give us back that in structured output and structured results. And that is not, again, possible. Again, if we just say run async and then a weather result object, it would still just give us back this. But you can do it. In this case, I've made it so you both get a structured result and some streaming data to show the example. So there will come a story about the city, but at the same time, it will show structured output down here with data that we control in a several manner. But the rest is streaming. And finally, if you want direct structured output, you don't need the streaming by itself, but you still want the data. You still need to do extra hoops in order to do that, but we can do it again. So the movie name of Star Wars is possible, and we can get this in a structured format. You will see that when I run use the code. So let's see how this works behind the scenes. So first up, we have our normal Aspire app host, and there's nothing special there. We just have the server and the client and have them wait for each other. So nothing special there. Then I made a small shared models because the models for the movie result, as it is here, needs to be used on both server side and client side. So I've just put it out in a separate class library. And at some point we need to turn some JSON into one of these. So I have one of those. And exactly the same for the weather report. We need to do something similar. Then if we look at the server, we will see that we do the normal new up Azure OpenAI client and build some agents. And in this case, we're building the agent that can handle the client tool. But as we can see, we're not adding the tool here. That will happen on the fly by the protocol. Then we have the weather agent, and we're just giving it the tool for the weather. And then we have a weather agent that needs to be structured, which is exactly the same, other than it just I'm just telling it, hey, get the weather, and then tell the story. So that's the only reason I have two of these, so I could have different instructions, else they're exactly the same. And then I finally have the movie structured output one that doesn't have any tools at all. Then we set up ADUI as a service, and we add cores now. We didn't need that in the basic video, of course, but we need cores in order to talk with Blazor WebAssembly because it's JavaScript behind the scenes. And then use cores down here. And now we are also exposing 4 agents, so you can just have multiple of these map ADUI stuff and give different agents to them. You will see there's some more advanced over here, but we'll get to that. And if we need to have authentication and such, we could just say require authentication and use regular.net in order to make authentication and stuff. But in this case, we will just keep them open. And then we have the server tool, which is just get some weather, and it's just returning some JSON or some object that will be turned into JSON. So no matter what city we are, it's sunny and 25 degrees Celsius. So that's not the important parts of this. We will get back to the server about what this odd thing are here, but on the client side, we just have our server root, and then we use the ADUI client with the different agent endpoints, so we can get them. And in terms of the one with the client tool, we just give it a tool down here, which is change the color, which just gives the home a different color. So this is the amazing part, that we can do that, while the other ones are just regular agents. And in order to have them all, and instead of using keyed services, I've just put them into a collection of the various agents I can use in the client. So nothing special there either. Then we have the home. Nothing special there as well in terms of the razor. Here is the thing that turns the background color to the color the tool will set. And we can set some breakpoints to show that. And then the color changer is just a requested color, and the change color, which will just go in and say change the color to on the color agent, which didn't have the tools, but on the fly it will get the client tool. So if we see that, we can set a breakpoint here, and we can set a breakpoint on the tool. client tool, and we can set a breakpoint. No, we can't really set a breakpoint on the server because it's just an agent and there's nothing to hook into because we're just using it. But if we find the GUI again, there we have it, and say we want to turn it red, we hit our breakpoint on normal buttons on the system. If there's a color, we call the color agent, change the color to red. And if we do that, I'll just press F5, it go to the server, and comes back in 1 second. There we go. And it came back with the color red. Again, if I have written the primary color of the Canadian flag, it will still have just given red back here because that's the AI part that takes that. And it takes and sets the color here. So when it does that, things turned red because in the UI now, we have background color equals red. So nothing special there. Okay. Next up, very simple as well. We want to have the Paris weather. For that, that's a server tool. So we can go to the server and set a breakpoint on the tool. And over here, it was our lookup of the weather. And if we press hit the breakpoint here, we call the weather agent, which had the server tool. So when we run it here, it will call the server tool. It have seen it's Paris, so that's nothing special there. But I could also have written, give me the weather for the capital of France, and it would also have recognized that that would be Paris and then send it in. So again, that's the AI part. But we just send this back, and we get back that the weather in Paris. So far, very simple to do. On our client side, we just say run streaming. And on our server side, it's just an agent that we don't even need to do anything other than expose it. But now begins the hard part. Because in the next sample, we wanted to get structured data back. Meaning we wanted to have both a streaming, but also some JSON back. And as I mentioned, when we look at that, I couldn't just go in and say run async. It would technically work in that it will not fail, but it will just not give JSON back. It will just give a streaming back. So the first thing we do over on the client side is the normal thing. We just say run streaming. And then we do some other things here, but we will go back to what that is once we have seen the client. Because the client have been newed up as a AGUI structured tool output agent. And this is an agent I have made in that it's a class that inherits from AI agents and then gets an inner agent and then what tool call it needs to report back to. In this case, get weather. So when you make a new agent, you essentially just inherit from AI agent and you are being told to override a few methods. Get new thread, where you just say inner agent, do that. Deinitialize thread, same. Then there's run async, and you can see I have actually just put in not implemented, because it will never ever call this in an AGUI situation. So I don't need to make an implementation. The implementation is easy, but so that would just be inner agent.run async and the data. But just to prove it's never being called, I've just made not implemented exception. But the important one is the run streaming async. So we just override that, and then we need to track what function calls are being called and what output they give. So we start run streaming behind the scenes. So we can actually, it's essentially an agent within an agent. And what we can do is we can set the breakpoint and see this in action. So if we go over here and write Paris, we hit our backend. And our backend is, we got a message which just says the word Paris. And then the update will run, which is the normal update. And whenever you override one of these, you need to yield return instead of everything. But what we need to do is we need to grab the various function calls. So if we set a breakpoint here, and we set a breakpoint here, and let it run, we will see that at some point during these updates, where it's begin to stream, we will get that it have called get weather. That is normal, nothing to do with AGUI, but because AGUI cannot give back a function called content, we need to turn it into another type of content. So in here, it's just that we want to call it, and then it's being called, and then we get the result back. So in here, we should have our value of, it's in some bytes, so we can't really see our data, but they will be in here. And what we need to do is we need to say, okay, if it's the one that matches our call, we can get the JSON out, which is again, we then turn into bytes and put them into what is called a data content. So we are essentially just taking the output of the tool call and turn it into a piece of JSON that we send along, just like when you have seen other of the videos, perhaps, that we get a file ID or we get an image back and stuff like that. Here we're just making our own content on the fly, because we don't just want the agent to interpret the tool call, we actually want the raw tool call data as a kind of structured output. And that's what we're doing here. We put it into this events, and whenever there's some events, which there will be in this case, we now send that along to the system, where we send the various events, meaning the various content objects. And when it's content object like this, we can begin to see what it's actually sending. So on this client side, let's see if we can still hook that in. We can now begin, when we get data back, look at the various content, and now the content have a function result call, which we just saw, and that we can turn into data content. We need to hit the right one. So there we have it, because there's content all the time when it's streaming. But here we have our content, And we now get our content, and we can on the fly, while it's also writing the message, get our JSON back and turn it into a real object that we can use in the GUI up here, and say whenever we have our structured data back, as this is the streaming part, and where we have the real data, we can write it, in my case, just in some divs, but we could make a fancy UI, a weather card, or put in a sunny, if we check that the condition is sunny, then show a sun as an image and so on. But doing it like this is the way to go in order for us to get on the fly a tool call turned into structured data plus some streaming. We could ignore the streaming if we wanted to, but the thing about having both is kind of interesting that you can actually do that. And again, this might look big and ugly, but trust me, if you want streaming, you need to do something like this, especially if you have long context, because again, on a client side alone, talking to a server, it's very difficult to get good streaming back compared to what this can do. The final scenario is that we want to have raw data back here in the agent. So up in the GUI, we just wait for a movie result, and if we have the movie result, we do use that structure. And in here, we just say actually run async. It doesn't really matter. It's just easier to do because it will again behind the scenes do streaming. So we just call run async in order to get the data back. And normally when you call run async and get data back as text, you are not really in control other than your instructions on how that comes back. But in this case, we are going in and add it as a AGUI structured output agent. So again, we make a new agent and we made it of type movie result. And what we do is we simply override the complete feature of streaming, because when it's raw structured output, there's no reason to stream, because you can't have half a JSON file. So what we do is we just go in and run async with the normal structured output part, and then we get the full response back, and then we turn it into a single agent response update. So that would be the same. Normally when you do streaming, you get lots and lots of updates. In this case, we're just making it so it gives one update back, and that one update back will be a text content with just the JSON. So if we set a breakpoint here and run over here and write Star Wars, what we receive over here is a streaming. Again, despite when I was over here, I called run async. AGUI don't care. It turns it in to a run streaming. So we didn't hit this exception. And our message is just the simple Star Wars. So essentially we're just making a run async, send in Star Wars, and turn that into a movie object. So when I registered this agent, you can see that I told it to be a movie result. So this agent can do streaming structured output, but it can only do that streaming output, movie results. So if I needed another structured output, it would need to be another agent. And And that's compared, of course, to a normal agent that you can, on the fly, for each request, ask for a different object. But again, can be done, and I have made this generic, so you can just copy paste it and use it for whatever you need. But the streaming is not a stream. It just gives us back our objects, and we could, of course, in this go in and get the result, which is what a real object. But in our case, we just want the JSON of that object, which is in text. So we send that one run update. We can go over here and see that. So buttons here. We hit early enough. So we hit here, and the reason why I didn't have early enough is because yield return actually goes back into the system. So, but we get them back here, and then we just turn that response, which is the text is just JSON, and turn it into a movie result. So to summarize here, this is hard. Luckily for you, you can just grab my special agents and have this up and running in almost no time now. But more advanced, even more advanced stuff where you have multiple tools in the same call and such things, you need to begin to actually wrap everything around in some kind of tool object that will have inner JSON, so you know if it's this tool call or this tool call who actually gave the data back and stuff like that. So yeah, it's beginning to be almost too difficult to be worded, to be honest. And again, I mentioned I had tried to have one more example because there's more examples up in a Copilot Kit, but I've just honestly given up because this is the human in the loop part where we need to use something called approval tools, which is a experimental feature in Microsoft Extensions AI. But because we can't give these requests of tool approval back and forward and always need to turn them into these data contents instead, it's a series of turning stuff into something simpler, turning it back into something advanced, turn it. So for example, if you want to see Agent Framework's own version of this, you will see that they have simple code here, but they also make a special agent, and this agent just to do this is 263 lines of code to do it on the server side, and then on the client side you need 266 more just to get this simple thing working. So I hope they will build more into the raw system or give us some helper methods that wraps this nicely with all scenarios, because right now this is too much to get to work, because this will only work for one type of approval. Then you make another type of approval and you need to do more or less the same wrapping and unwrapping all the the different messages in the system. And that's, in my book, too much for now. But when I first noticed that structured output was not possible in ADUI, I was really, really bummed about that. Now I can at least continue. Okay, I can't make human in the loop. I will live with that probably, or do some regular request response about that perhaps, and not have streaming on it. But getting some kind of structured output is actually possible when we work with it. So that's at least something. So as mentioned, this is a long video. This is very nerdy and very, very hard to do. But if you want to go all in on ADUI, this is the way to go for now, at least. If more comes into the system, into the protocol, I will give an update on some easier way, perhaps, at some point. But for now, that's what we have. So see you in the next one.